Give this to his wife. Under no circumstances let him see it. The sentence landed right above my head, clear enough to send a chill down my spine. I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't move, but I heard every single word. My heart started racing beneath the anesthesia, which hadn't yet pulled me fully into unconsciousness. In that moment, I understood that my marriage was over, even though I was still lying on the operating table. I chose to remain completely still, not out of fear, but because I had just decided I would let no one know that I had heard everything. Where are you listening to this story from? What city? What country? Leave a comment below and hit like so this story can reach more people. Somewhere out there may be someone standing in front of the same kind of truth I was. My name is William Hayward. I am 56 years old. If you have ever lived in North Carolina, you will understand the strange mix of warmth and chill in the early mornings. When dew still clings to car windows, Charlotte's streets are not yet crowded, and people still believe family is the one certainty in life. I believed that too. 27 years ago, I married Evelyn and thought I had chosen the right woman to walk beside me for the rest of my life. The vasectomy was never really my decision alone. It came from Evelyn. She spoke calmly, reasonably, the way a wife concerned about her husband would. Age, risk, health. We're not young anymore. We don't need any more upheaval. I nodded because her words sounded logical, and because I was used to trusting my wife. That morning I sat in the car while Evelyn drove. On the dashboard, the clock showed just before 7 a.m. It was still dark outside, streetlights casting a pale yellow glow across the hood. I looked over and saw her hands steady on the steering wheel, my wedding ring catching the light the way it always had. She smiled and asked, "Are you okay?" I answered, "I'm fine." A simple response, as if we were heading to a routine checkup, not stepping through a door I would never walk back through with the same heart again. The hospital was bright and clean, the sharp scent of antiseptic mixed with the cold air from the ventilation system, a smell anyone who has ever been near an operating room recognizes instantly. I checked in, signed forms, answered familiar questions. Evelyn sat close beside me, her hand resting on my thigh at exactly the right moment, exactly the right place, like a habit perfected over years. She even made a light joke to ease my nerves. Anyone looking at us would have thought we were a solid, devoted couple. Then I met the doctor. Dr. Andrew Collins, a man in his early 50s, salt and pepper hair, tall, with a calm voice that suggested everything under his control was already arranged. He shook my hand, but his eyes slid past me quickly, the way someone looks at a name on a list rather than a person. I had met many people like that in my line of work. Confident, decisive, rarely slowed by emotion. The nurse assisting that day was named Nora. I remember because she had dark circles under her eyes, like someone who hadn't slept properly in days, and her hands trembled slightly as she checked my wristband. Nora spoke politely and professionally, but there was something in the way she glanced at Evelyn that felt off. Just a flicker. A very quick look, as if she were confirming something she had already been instructed about. They wheeled me into the operating room. The lights overhead were blindingly white, making everything look as if there were no shadows left to hide any secrets. I lay down, the cold of the table seeping through the thin hospital gown. Someone attached monitors to my chest, the steady beeping filling the room. The anesthesiologist spoke in a practiced tone, telling me the sedation would make me drowsy, to breathe slowly, and to count backward. I reached 8, then 7, then 6. The world softened. But it wasn't deep sleep. It felt like being suspended between two layers of water, still hearing echoes, still aware of my heartbeat, while my body no longer belonged to me. And then, that sentence fell like a blade. Give this to his wife. Under no circumstances let him see it. I heard it clearly, every word. No haziness of sleep, no blur from medication. A man's low, firm voice, carrying tension barely concealed. I also heard fabric rustle, like an envelope brushing against a pocket. Then Nora's reply, very quiet, almost apologetic. I wanted to sit up, to ask why, to shout that I was still there, but I couldn't move a finger. All I could feel was my heart pounding against my ribs, fast enough that I thought the monitor would alarm. Strangely, it didn't. The drugs kept my body silent while my mind screamed. Another line followed, shorter, but enough to freeze the blood in my veins. She's waiting. She, my wife, Evelyn. For a split second, I thought I must have misunderstood. There was no reason for Evelyn to be waiting for an envelope in my operating room. No reason for a doctor to say, "Don't let him see it." And no reason for a nurse as tense as Nora to nod in agreement. I understood immediately, without needing another explanation. Men my age often believe they have seen enough of life to be beyond surprise. But some surprises don't strike like thunder. They come like fingernails scraping inside your skull, quiet and relentless, and by the time you realize it, you've already been torn apart from the inside. I did something I never expected of myself. I forced my breathing to stay even. I relaxed my face. I tried to keep my heart rate from climbing, like someone playing a game of freezing in the dark. I could not let them know I had heard. If they knew, they would change the script. And if they changed the script, I would never know what that envelope was. For the next 30 minutes, time stretched like rubber. I heard instruments, heard technical words I didn't understand, but every sound reminded me I was in someone else's hands. I thought of Claire, my daughter, 22 years old, final year of law school, a child I had always been proud of, always believed I had been a good father to. I thought of our house, of evenings with Evelyn reading magazines on the sofa, the fireplace crackling in winter. All of it passed through my mind like a film someone had fast-forwarded, and in the center of the screen there was only one image. The envelope. They wheeled me into recovery. The light was softer, the machines steadier, the antiseptic smell still clinging to the air. I cracked my eyes open just a little, like someone waking from deep sleep. Nora was nearby. She tried to act normal, but her hand kept touching the pocket of her scrubs, always the same spot, as if checking that something was still there. I kept my eyes half closed. I breathed slowly. I did everything right for a groggy patient. Evelyn appeared a few minutes later. She stepped in quietly, hair neat, coat clean, eyes slightly red in the precise way of a worried wife. She took my hand, brushed her thumb over the back of it. "Are you okay?" she asked. Her voice was so sweet that if I hadn't heard what I heard in the operating room, I would have believed her instantly. I murmured something, pretending I couldn't speak yet. Nora looked from Evelyn to me as if waiting for a signal. After a moment, Nora said the doctor wanted to speak with Evelyn privately before I fully woke up. Evelyn nodded immediately, too quickly. "Of course," she said as if she had rehearsed the answer. She leaned down and kissed my forehead lightly. "I'll be right back," she whispered. I heard her footsteps leave. I heard the door close. I waited a few breaths, then opened my eyes fully. Nora startled. "You woke up sooner than expected," she said, hurrying to keep her tone casual. "I need water," I said hoarsely. My own voice sounded borrowed from someone else. My throat burned. Nora brought water, her hands still trembling slightly. I took a small sip and set the cup down. "Bathroom," I said, trying to sit up. Nora moved to help me immediately. I let her, but in my mind I was already measuring the distance from the bed to the door and the location of the consultation room. American hospitals have long corridors, glass walls, and sometimes that transparency becomes a knife that cuts their own secrets. I walked slowly, pretending to be dizzy. I went into the bathroom and locked the door. Once it closed, I noticed a small window in the corner, angled toward the opposite hallway. From there, I could see part of the consultation room. Not clearly, but enough. Evelyn sat alone at first. Her hands rested on the table, her gaze lowered, waiting. Then Nora entered. I held my breath. Nora pulled out a white envelope and placed it on the table in front of Evelyn. No explanation, no additional papers, just the envelope. Nora said something very softly, then turned and left immediately, like someone who had just done something wrong. Evelyn stared at the envelope for a few seconds. I saw her hand shake. Then she opened it. Her face changed in clear stages. First shock, then her lips curved ever so slightly, a reflex she didn't manage to hide. And then tears spilled over. But what made my blood run cold was not the tears. It was the way she cried. Not in pain, not in despair. It was the cry of someone who had just been released from a long-held burden. Tears of relief. Tears of someone who had waited a very long time for something that had finally arrived. I gripped the sink. My stomach twisted. Nausea from the anesthesia surged, but it wasn't just the drugs. It was betrayal rising up my throat. The consultation room door opened. Dr. Andrew Collins stepped in. He sat across from Evelyn. They spoke, and I couldn't hear the words, but I saw enough. He reached across the table and placed his hand over Evelyn's, a touch far too intimate to be called comfort. Evelyn didn't pull away. She let it rest there, as if it were familiar. Anyone who has been married as long as I have understands. There are touches that mean something and touches that are just polite. What I saw was not polite. I turned away and dry heaved into the toilet. Not much came up, but enough to sting my eyes, sweat breaking out along my neck. I stood there for a moment, bracing myself against the wall, my heart pounding like a hammer. When I stepped back out, Nora was there, her face full of concern. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said, my voice strangely calm. I forced it steady. I asked casually, "Where's my wife?" Nora looked away. "She had something urgent," she replied. "She said she'd be back to pick you up in about 2 hours." I nodded. I didn't challenge her. I didn't ask more. Because I understood. They thought I was still foggy from the drugs, that I would lie there, trust them, fall back asleep. But I wasn't asleep anymore. Not ever. I took out my phone, my hands still shaking slightly, but my mind razor sharp. I opened my contacts. One name stood out immediately, the only person I trusted now. I typed a short message. 4 words, no explanation, no emotion. "Mark, I need you." I set the phone down. I leaned back into the recovery bed and closed my eyes like a well-behaved patient. I let everyone believe I was weak, that I was tired, that I knew nothing. Because if there was an envelope they had to hide, then there was something far bigger behind it. And I had just stepped into a different life, one where every smile from Evelyn could be a trap, every caring question a countdown. The only thing I was certain of was this. That envelope wasn't just about the surgery. It was about me. And I had the sinking feeling that it was only the first page of a file my wife had been preparing for a very long time. I lay there a while longer in recovery, eyes half closed, ears catching the soft squeak of rubber soles in the hallway and the steady beep of the heart monitor. My head burned as if I'd come through a fever. But the more it hurt, the clearer everything felt. Part of me still wanted to believe I had misunderstood, that the envelope was nothing more than insurance paperwork or post-op instructions. But then I remembered Evelyn's face when she opened it. Those tears of relief did not belong to a wife worried about her husband. Nora came back to check my blood pressure. She avoided meeting my eyes. I didn't blame her. People in hospitals often just follow instructions, while the biggest secrets belong to those with power. I had lived in that world myself. In real estate, the most important deals always happened behind closed doors, and the ones who lost were usually the ones who believed everything was transparent. When Evelyn didn't return to pick me up as Nora said she would, I wasn't surprised. A staff member wheeled me to the pickup area and arranged a medical ride according to procedure. I sat on a bench near the entrance, watching people move through the hospital lobby with bouquets, coffee cups, faces filled with worry and hope. I wondered how many of them were being betrayed at that very moment without knowing it. I had been one of them until that morning. On the way home, I watched Charlotte slide past the car window. The trees, the billboards, the familiar corners all felt strangely distant. I had lived here more than half my life. I thought I knew every road. But it turned out there were roads inside my own life I had never walked because I trusted the person beside me to lead the way. My name is William. I was born in a small town in Virginia and moved to North Carolina when I was young. I started as a broker, then partnered with a friend to buy our first piece of land. Things grew over the years. I was never flashy rich. I built slowly, brick by brick, treating my word like my honor. My father used to say a man is measured by whether he keeps his word. I tried to live by that. I met Evelyn at a children's hospital fundraiser one evening at a hotel in Uptown. I was nearly 30 then, just starting to make a name for myself. Evelyn felt like a gentle breeze. She didn't try to stand out, didn't cling to money talk. She asked about my family, about what scared me most after successful deals. I remember that feeling clearly. I felt seen as a person, not a wallet. Evelyn was intelligent and had a way of making people feel safe. She knew how to listen. She also knew when to speak. I was used to loud women at parties, but Evelyn was different. She walked beside me without pulling me away from myself. When we married, my friends said I was lucky. I believed them. Then Claire was born, a baby with bright eyes and a strong cry. I held her in my arms and instantly understood there were things far greater than any project. Claire grew up in our quiet neighborhood, went to school, played basketball in high school, and got into law school. She's 22 now, in her final year, and she talks about justice as if it were something you could touch. On some evenings, Claire sat at the kitchen table reading case materials, while Evelyn brewed tea and draped a thin shawl over her daughter's shoulders. Those moments used to be the definition of happiness for me. My family was seen as the standard of stability. We didn't stir up trouble, no scandals, no showing off. Our money sat in assets and work, not in extravagant parties. I had gone semi-retired in recent years, handing off responsibilities to my management team, keeping only the key decisions. I thought I'd done everything right. I thought I was entering the peaceful stage of a man's life. But I have to admit something older men rarely do. I trusted too easily. I was used to Evelyn always being there, gentle, composed, always knowing how to ease tension. I was used to feeling loved without needing to guard myself. And when you get used to that, you tend to overlook the small signs, just because you don't want to rewrite the story you're living in. The signs began about 2 years ago. Evelyn started disappearing. Not on long business trips, but in small gaps during the day. Afternoons spent meeting friends, long phone calls in the car before coming inside. She began using her phone differently. The screen was always face down, the ringer always on silent. And then I noticed a second phone. I didn't go through her things. I saw it by accident one day when she forgot it in the laundry room drawer. A small, dark phone. No cute case like her main one. It looked like the kind of phone used by someone who wanted to disappear without leaving a trace. That evening, when Evelyn came home, I didn't confront her right away. I waited until Claire had gone upstairs. I spoke casually, like it was nothing serious. I held up the second phone, meaning to return it to her. But the instant my finger touched the screen, Evelyn moved like she'd been shocked. She snatched it out of my hand, her eyes sharp enough to make me feel I was looking at a stranger. Then she said quietly, but with words that hit like nails, "You don't need to control me. I'm not your property." I froze, the dish towel in my hand suddenly useless. I wasn't the kind of man who snooped. I had never forbidden my wife anything. That sentence made me feel like I'd been cast in a role I never signed up for. I chose silence. I apologized. I said I was just worried. Evelyn exhaled, softened, and told me it was a work phone, used to separate client communication. She smiled, kissed my cheek, as if it had all been a misunderstanding. I believed her. I convinced myself it was midlife stress, pressure, something that would pass. I looked at Evelyn and chose to keep the peace because I was afraid a single question could shatter everything. But now, after that envelope in the operating room, I knew those memories were no longer innocent. They were like old photographs dipped in black ink. The shapes remained, but the meaning had warped. That evening, I walked into the house slowly, carefully, like someone afraid of dropping something fragile. The kitchen was still tidy. The vase on the table still held fresh flowers. Everything looked painfully normal. I sat down and listened to the ticking of the clock, each second like a countdown. My message to Mark still had no reply. I looked up toward the stairs, where Claire's room was at the end of the hall. She didn't know anything yet, and I realized a second truth that day. If Evelyn could hide an envelope from me while I was lying on an operating table, she could have hidden a lot more over 27 years. The front door opened. Evelyn walked in as if she had just come back from work. She hung up her coat and called my name in that familiar, gentle tone. I turned around, keeping my face neutral. Evelyn smiled, asked if I was in pain, if I needed anything. I nodded and gave a simple answer. "I'm fine." While she poured a glass of water, I watched her every move, and I realized something that chilled me more than what I'd heard in the operating room. Evelyn was acting very well, but I was no longer her audience. My phone buzzed softly in my pocket. A message from Mark appeared, short and sharp, like a knock on the door at midnight. "Don't say a word to her. I'll meet you tonight." I looked at Evelyn's back as she stood at the counter, and a thought echoed in my mind, sharp and cold. If today was only about an envelope, then tonight I might learn the real name of what was waiting for me. Mark's text cleared my head like someone had opened a window in a suffocating room. I slid the phone back into my pocket, making sure no light escaped from the screen. Evelyn's back was turned, the sound of running water perfectly ordinary, almost cruelly so. She placed the glass on the table, asked if I wanted something to eat, and casually mentioned a meeting downtown, as if it were any other day. I nodded at the right moments, gave short replies, playing the part of a husband recovering from a minor procedure who needed rest. But in my mind, everything had shifted. My thoughts no longer followed habit, they followed detail. Every breath, every glance, every pause. I remembered that morning a few weeks ago when Evelyn brought up the vasectomy at breakfast as if she were talking about changing the garage light bulb. It was drizzling outside, raindrops tapping steadily on the kitchen window. Claire had left early with her laptop and a pile of heavy books. It was just me and Evelyn, a quiet space I had once found comforting. "William, can we talk for a moment?" Evelyn began, her voice soft, perfectly reasonable. I remember folding my newspaper, looking at her over my glasses. "Sure, what about?" She placed her hand over mine, that familiar gesture like a key unlocking trust. "I think you should get a vasectomy," she said. "At our age, there's no reason to take more risks. I worry about complications." I paused for a beat, not because the suggestion was strange, but because of how she said it. It didn't sound spontaneous. It sounded planned, something folded neatly in a drawer, waiting for the right time to be pulled out. I chuckled awkwardly. "A vasectomy? What made you think of that all of a sudden?" Evelyn didn't laugh. She looked straight at me, calm and steady. "I've been thinking about it for a while." Then she pulled out her phone and opened a pre-written note. The name of the doctor, Dr. Andrew Collins, the hospital, the appointment date, even pre-op and post-op instructions like a shopping list. I still remember the faint unease creeping up my spine, not from the idea itself, but from how smooth and prepared she already was. "You've done your homework," I said lightly, trying to keep it playful. Evelyn squeezed my hand, her tone soft as if soothing a child. "I'm doing this for you. For our family. You just need to meet the doctor, hear what he says. You don't have to decide right away." I nodded. Not because I wanted to, but because I was used to believing Evelyn always did things for our good. I even felt guilty for doubting her. I told myself she was just being cautious. She just wanted to protect us. But there was something I saw, though I couldn't name it then. When I nodded, Evelyn exhaled in a way that felt like release. Relief that was too deep for a simple precaution. The corner of her lips lifted, not the smile of happiness, but the smile of someone who had just confirmed a plan was on track. I brushed the feeling off with a joke, the way men do when they don't want to face discomfort. "Are you afraid I'll have another kid?" I teased, sipping my coffee. Evelyn replied immediately, without hesitation, her tone quick and sharp as a blade slipping from its sheath. "No," she said too quickly. "I'm afraid you'll outlast all of us." Then she laughed, light as air, as if it were just a harmless joke between husband and wife. She even covered her mouth, adding a casual, "You know I'm kidding." I laughed too. A stiff, uneasy sound, but I still laughed. I chose to believe it was a clumsy joke from a woman under stress. I chose to let it go because I didn't want to start a conversation that could change everything. Now, sitting in the familiar kitchen, listening to Evelyn rummage through drawers for herbal tea, good for recovery, that line came back to me bare and cold. It fit perfectly with the envelope in the operating room, two pieces of the same picture. I looked at Evelyn's back, still gentle, still caring, still playing her perfect part, and that scared me more than any burst of anger ever could. You can face rage. You can't defend yourself against a warm hand on your shoulder hiding a knife behind your back. Evelyn brought over the tea, set it in front of me. "Drink this. It'll help with the pain," she said. I took a small sip. The hot tea slid down my throat, but didn't warm anything inside me. I thanked her, said I was tired and might go to bed early. Evelyn brushed my shoulder, her eyes sweeping over me as if confirming I was still within her control. As night fell, Evelyn went upstairs first, saying she had a work call to make. I heard the bedroom door close. I stayed in the living room, turned off most of the lights, leaving only a small lamp on. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't want noise to drown out what mattered. I began noting every small detail, as if learning a new language, the language of truth. Who scheduled what? Who texted late? When Evelyn left the house, the way she always placed her phone face down, the way she smiled when I asked something sensitive, the way she said, "Don't worry," too quickly. A plan began to take shape in my head, simple but vital. I wouldn't confront her. I wouldn't corner her. I wouldn't let a single crack show in my calm. I would observe, gather, wait. If they had an envelope, they had a file. If they had a file, they had a goal. And if that goal was me, I had to learn what they were planning before they made their move. My phone buzzed again. Not Mark, just a calendar reminder about a project meeting next week. Something trivial. But in that moment, I realized something else. My life had always been built on schedules and plans. I'd spent decades managing risk, on construction sites, in contracts, in legal matters. I just never imagined I'd have to use those same skills to protect my own life, from the woman who had slept beside me for 27 years. I stood up and walked quietly up the stairs. Outside the bedroom door, I heard Evelyn talking softly on the phone, her voice low, words swallowed by the wood. I didn't press my ear against it. I didn't do anything foolish. I just stood there a moment, noting one fact. She was still talking, still calling. On the very night I came home from the hospital, I went back to the small office downstairs, opened a drawer, and took out an old notebook I used for contracts. I turned to the first page and wrote a single line, in firm handwriting that didn't shake. From today on, I'm no longer allowed to trust out of habit. I closed the notebook, pushed it deep into the drawer like hiding a small flame. The house was so quiet I could hear the fridge hum, the faint creak of wood as Evelyn shifted upstairs. I sat under the dim lamp, staring into the dark window, reminding myself, stay calm. The impatient man loses first. The next morning, I did everything a man recovering from surgery should do. Took my medication, walked slowly, complained a little about the pain to make it look believable. Evelyn made breakfast, asked if I felt dizzy, if I was nauseous. She asked more than usual, and every question had a trace of checking behind it. I answered just enough, not too little to arouse suspicion, not too much to give myself away. When Evelyn finally left, saying she had to stop by the office, I picked up my phone and called Mark. Not on speaker. I stood in the garage where the rolling door and street noise would mask any chance of being overheard. "You free?" I asked. Mark's voice was gravelly and steady, the kind of voice shaped by desert dust and the sound of helicopter rotors more than music. "Give me 10 minutes. I'll meet you at the usual place." The usual place was an old diner off South Boulevard, where the coffee was always bitter and the waitresses remembered your name. Mark and I had sat there many times after he left the service. I arrived early, picked a corner booth with my back to the wall, a habit I'd never shaken from years of high-stakes negotiations. Mark walked in on time, dark jacket, cap pulled low. He looked at me for a second, scanning my face like reading terrain. "You don't look good," he said. "I just had a procedure," I answered, keeping my tone steady. "But that's not the problem." I didn't tell him everything. Not about the marriage, not about the second phone, not about the joke. "Afraid you'll live too long." I only told him what made my blood turn cold in that operating room. The envelope, the warning, the name Dr. Andrew Collins, how Evelyn was waiting, and how she cried with relief when she opened it. Mark didn't interrupt. He listened like a man assembling a weapon piece by piece. When I finished, he set down his coffee slowly and asked a single question. "Do you trust your wife?" That question hit the sore spot. I looked out the window where the morning sun shimmered on the street. "I did," I said, "but now I'm not sure I know who she is." Mark nodded slightly. "All right, then we do it the old way. Quiet. Watch. Don't let them know you're awake." He said it with a calm that was almost chilling, like it was just another mission. I felt a strange steadiness settle inside me. I needed someone like Mark, not to comfort me, but to keep my head straight. "I'll investigate," Mark said, "but you have to promise me a few things. 1, you don't ask your wife anything. 2, you don't follow her alone. 3, you start protecting what's yours, starting today." "I understand," I said. Mark pulled out a small notebook and wrote down the doctor's name, the hospital, and the surgery date. He asked for more details about who made the appointment and whether Evelyn knew the doctor beforehand. I answered everything I knew. With each reply, I realized just how frightening Evelyn's level of control really was. "Do you have a family lawyer?" Mark asked. "I do," I said. "Someone who's worked with me for years." "Don't use that person," Mark said immediately. "Not yet. When money and reputation are involved, people tend to share friends. We need a clean line." I nodded. My heart was heavy and slow. I understood what he meant. If this were just an affair, I could be angry, hurt, I could file for divorce, but that envelope didn't smell like romance, it smelled like planning. On the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio. I kept thinking about protecting what belongs to you. In my world, protection wasn't just about money. It was about control, about Claire's safety, about not letting someone tear down the house while I was still standing in it. That night, I made a quiet appointment with a private wealth manager I'd been referred to years ago but never needed. I didn't make a scene, didn't move everything, just shifted enough to create a buffer. A trust fund under Claire's name, structured so she'd be secure if anything ever happened to me. I signed the papers like a father preparing for his daughter's future, but inside, it felt like a silent counterattack. If someone was calculating my life, they wouldn't hold all the cards anymore. I didn't tell Claire. I didn't tell Evelyn. I kept my face calm, ate dinner, asked Claire about her exams. She told me about a mock trial she was preparing for, her eyes glowing when she talked about justice. I listened, my throat tight. She didn't know the woman she called Mom might be standing on the wrong side of truth. 2 days later, Mark called. He didn't say much over the phone, just texted, "Meet me, not at your house." We met in a parking lot behind a hardware store, the kind no one really looks at. Mark opened his car door and handed me a few printed pages and a small flash drive. "Dr. Andrew Collins," he said quietly. "Used to work in Florida. Ethical violations. Didn't make the big papers, but there's an internal disciplinary record. Something about inappropriate relations with a patient's relative. You understand what I'm saying, right?" I clenched my hands on my knees, not because I was shocked, but because everything was starting to fit together in a way that made me sick. Mark flipped another page. Also, his finances. Problematic, large, regular cash inflows, smartly structured, broken into small parts, like someone afraid of being noticed. "From where?" I asked. Mark looked at me. "Not sure yet, but the pattern goes through a shell company. I'm tracing it." I swallowed hard. The wind blew across the lot, carrying the smell of hot asphalt and dust. My spine went cold. That same day, Evelyn began acting restless. She asked about my recovery more than usual, called during the day, texted to remind me about medicine, told me not to drive, not to go to the office. On the surface, it looked like concern, but underneath, I could hear the tension, like someone waiting for a result that wasn't coming fast enough. That evening, she sat beside me on the sofa, her hand resting lightly on my arm, her eyes studying me longer than normal. "Are you sure you're feeling okay?" she asked. "Nothing strange?" I smiled, trying to make it warm. "I'm fine, just need rest." Evelyn nodded, but her eyes didn't soften. They measured me, calculated. When she went upstairs, Mark called again. His voice wasn't calm. "William," he said slowly, every word landing heavy. "This isn't an affair." I stood motionless in the dim living room, listening to the ticking clock. "Then what is it?" I asked, though deep down, I already knew I wouldn't like the answer. Mark paused, then said something that froze my hands. "This is a script." Script was a strange word for a marriage. It wasn't what you used to describe an affair. It was a word for something written, directed, rehearsed, with a goal and an ending already decided. I didn't respond right away. I looked at my reflection in the glass window, a man whose hair had more gray than black, shoulders tired but eyes wide open. "Explain," I said softly, making sure Evelyn couldn't hear me upstairs. Mark exhaled. "I'm pulling up your wife's real past, not the one she told you, the one she buried." My chest tightened. I remembered Evelyn's stories about her youth up north, her private family, her wish for a fresh start. I had believed her because she'd told it calmly. Calm sounds honest. "Tomorrow," Mark said, "I'll show you something. Don't let anyone see us." The next morning, I told Evelyn I wanted to take a short walk to loosen up. She immediately offered to join me. I smiled and declined, saying I'd just walk around the block. She studied me for a few seconds, weighing whether to follow or to play the supportive wife. She chose the latter, though she called after me, "Take your phone. Call me if you need anything." I walked down the familiar streets, then got in my car and drove to a small lot behind a warehouse where Mark usually passed off documents. The morning was cold, pale sunlight. Mark was already waiting in his car, door slightly open, the way someone sits when they don't want to be seen. He handed me a brown envelope. I looked at it and felt my spine chill. Envelopes. Again, my life was starting to be run by paper. "Not from the hospital," Mark said. "Public records." I opened it. Inside were printed documents and handwritten notes from Mark. Short, direct. The first line made my throat tighten. Evelyn Harper. I read it again. Harper. Not the name I knew. Evelyn had taken my last name, Hayward, when we married. Before that, she said her maiden name didn't matter, that her family preferred privacy. I had respected that. I thought it was dignity. Now I saw it was disguise. Mark pointed to a page. Her old identity. Born in Florida, lived in Jacksonville, then Atlanta for a while, work records, rental applications, all of it checks out. I could hear my pulse in my ears. I'd always believed Evelyn came to Charlotte just before we met, that our encounter had been fate. But if she'd already lived in the South for years, her fresh start story was a performance. "There's more," Mark said, turning another page. A small society clipping from an old local paper, slightly yellowed, from a late 90s charity gala. The photo hit me like a slap. Evelyn, younger, long hair, bright smile, standing beside a man in a tuxedo. The man's face made my stomach twist. Andrew Collins. No doubt. The forehead, the jawline, the eyes, it was him. And the way Evelyn stood next to him, close, familiar. It wasn't just proximity. It was intimacy. The caption below the photo was brief. A charity gala celebrating an engaged couple. I didn't need to finish the sentence. The word engaged was enough to turn my throat to sand. Nearly 30 years ago, Mark said, she was engaged to him. Then she vanished. No breakup notice, no trace, just disappeared. I held the paper, my hand trembling no matter how hard I tried to steady it. I had spent decades believing I knew the woman beside me, but the evidence in my hand proved there was an entire act she'd erased before stepping onto my stage. "Now, you understand what I meant by script?" Mark asked. I nodded slowly, my mouth dry. I looked again at the photo. The younger Evelyn didn't look exactly like the woman I lived with now, but her eyes were the same, the eyes of someone who knows exactly where to stand to be seen. I thought about the charity events we'd attended together in Charlotte. Evelyn always appeared perfectly measured, never flashy, never invisible, always standing in the right place, smiling at the right time, shaking the right hand. I used to be proud of her poise. Now I wondered where she'd learned it, and what she'd used it for. I wasn't the first man chosen. The thought landed like a sentence carved in glass. I had once believed our meeting had been chance, a look across a fundraiser, a dinner, love. But if she'd already moved in the same circles, once engaged to a doctor, then disappeared, then appeared where my first big project was making headlines, how much of chance was design? Did she know me before we met? I asked quietly. Mark didn't answer right away. He handed me another sheet, an old business article about one of my first construction projects in Charlotte, the interview that first put my name in print. He tapped the date. "This ran a few weeks before you met her," Mark said. "Right after that, an Evelyn Harper applied to an event planning company. That company managed the exact fundraiser where you two met." I stared at the page, my gut turning cold. The memories I'd cherished, the warm, golden beginnings, dimmed to gray. I thought about her questions, the way she'd drawn me out about my fears, my family, the things that made me feel seen. I'd called it understanding. Now it felt like a questionnaire prepared in advance. Mark rested his hand on the steering wheel. You have to keep acting. Don't change your behavior. If they're writing a script, they're watching your every reaction. I inhaled slowly, forcing calm. I thought about Claire, about our home, about how one wrong move could make me the unpredictable variable, and sometimes the variable destroys itself first. I slid all the papers back into the envelope, as if shoving a part of my life back into the dark. Keep going, I said. Mark nodded. I'll dig deeper, but you hold steady. Don't let emotions run the play. I drove home, hands steady on the wheel. When I stepped inside, I kept the same tired smile. Evelyn asked if I felt dizzy, if the walk was too long. I smiled, said I was fine, just moved slower. She adjusted my collar like always, her hand warm, but it no longer felt comforting. It felt dangerous. The warmer it was, the more it burned. That night when she went upstairs to shower, I sat alone in my office, opened my notebook, and wrote one sentence, my own kind of vow. Every beautiful memory can become evidence. And I understood then. I was no longer living in the story I'd told myself. I was living in the one Evelyn had written, and my job was to take back the pen before she reached the final page. I didn't sleep that night, not because of the pain from surgery, but because the name Evelyn Harper flickered in my mind like a dying light bulb. I lay beside her, listening to her calm breathing, the tiny shifts of her body in sleep. To anyone else, it looked peaceful, an ordinary bedroom of a stable marriage, but I lay there like a guard, fully awake, aware that the stranger I feared was already inside my home. Close to 1 a.m., my phone vibrated softly. I turned on my side, cupping my hand over the screen. A message from Mark. Just 3 words. Check your email. I slipped quietly out of bed, went downstairs, and closed the office door. The desk lamp cast a small circle of light, just enough for me to see my hands trembling. I hated the shaking, but my body wouldn't stop. I opened the laptop, logged into the alternate account Mark had set up, a secure channel for whatever he was about to send. There was an attachment. The file name looked harmless, something like Report August. I clicked it open, and in that instant, my heart felt like it was being crushed. A DNA test report. My name, William Hayward. Claire's name. The conclusion printed clearly in cold clinical lines. Probability of paternity, practically 0. I stared at that number. My eyes scanned each line like a man rereading his own death sentence, hoping to find a typo. But the letters stayed. Clear. Still. Unshaken. Only I was shaking. I had raised Claire for 22 years. I remembered the day she gripped my finger in the hospital. Tiny, but so strong. I remembered the sleepless nights when she had a fever, the days teaching her to drive, the moments she called me Dad in that stubborn yet tender voice. If this paper was true, then all of that was the cruelest joke life could play. I didn't realize when I'd stood up. I walked around the room like someone pushed into cold water, gasping for air. I gripped the edge of the desk, trying to breathe evenly, but my chest kept tightening. Why did Evelyn have this? Why did she hide it? And why was it landing on me right now? My screen lit up again with a new message from Mark. Don't panic. Don't do anything yet. Call me. I called. My voice was rough. Mark, this thing... I've seen it, he said quickly but firmly. I pulled it from your wife's cloud storage. She kept it in a hidden folder. Listen to me, William. This isn't real. It's psychological warfare. But it has my name, and Claire's. That's the point, Mark replied. They want you to see it. They want you to break. They want you disoriented, doubting yourself and doubting your daughter. When a man starts questioning his family, he weakens. He becomes easy to guide, easy to isolate. I closed my eyes. The tears didn't fall, but they burned like sand. I hated being manipulated. Worse, they were using Claire as a weapon. "What should I do?" I asked. Mark didn't hesitate. "Independent testing. Tonight." I looked at the clock. Past midnight. "How?" "There's a way," Mark said. "I know a doctor. Private lab. They do home collections for civil cases. No questions, no talking. Just act normal. I'll come to you." "William, listen carefully. Whatever you're feeling right now, do not let Evelyn see you've been hit where it hurts most." I took a deep breath. That was the hardest part. I'd negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts, spoken before city councils, faced crowds without shaking, but facing a paper that said Claire wasn't mine, I nearly shattered. "I can do it," I said, though it sounded like someone else's voice. An hour later, Mark arrived at the back door with a middle-aged woman in a dark coat, calm and professional. They moved straight to the office, efficient and quiet. The woman opened a small kit, gloves, sealed bags, sterile swabs. Mark motioned for me to stay still. "We need samples from you and Claire," Mark said softly. I looked toward the stairs. Claire was asleep upstairs, an early class in the morning. I couldn't wake her, couldn't say, "Sweetheart, your dad needs you for a DNA test," without destroying her world. Mark caught my hesitation. "I'll handle it." He went upstairs, silent as a shadow. I stood below, hearing his footsteps stop outside Claire's door. A few moments later, he came back with a paper cup and a sealed swab bag. He didn't explain, and I didn't ask. All I knew was that Claire was still asleep, and Mark had done what needed to be done without frightening her. Then it was my turn. The woman told me to open my mouth, swabbed the inside of my cheek, sealed it. It was all precise, cold, and mechanical, like a courtroom procedure. When she left, Mark stayed with me in the office. The desk lamp made his face look tired, but his eyes were sharp. "I'll take it in now," he said. "I'll get results as soon as possible." I sat down, hands locked together to keep them from shaking. The air conditioner hummed steadily. The house was quiet. Evelyn asleep, Claire asleep. But I was suspended between two truths, one real, one false. The only thing keeping me upright was the thought that Claire deserved protection from this filth. Near dawn, before sunrise, my phone buzzed. "Mark." "I have it," he said. My heart jumped. "That fast?" "I paid for rush processing. William, sit down." I was already sitting, but my legs felt weak. 99.9%, Mark said, each word stamped with certainty. "Claire is your biological daughter." I couldn't speak. I just exhaled, long and slow, like a man breaking the surface after nearly drowning. Warmth spread through my chest, not joy, but life returning. Claire was mine. The one true thing in this chaos remained true. Then the cold came back, sharper. "So the report was fake," I said quietly. "Yes," Mark replied. "And the fact that it was in Evelyn's account means it was meant to be found at the right moment. It's a psychological setup. Once you believe you're not her father, you either collapse in shame or explode in rage. Either way, they win." I looked out the window. The North Carolina sky was pale, blank as unwritten paper. The terrifying part wasn't that they hated me. It was that they had calculated every one of my reactions like compound interest. I was about to ask what came next when Mark's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "William," he said, "they're preparing to get rid of you." I hung up but couldn't stand. His words didn't sound like a warning. They sounded like a weather report. The storm is coming. Not maybe, but definitely. I sat there in my office, listening to Evelyn's footsteps upstairs, the sound of running water in the bathroom, the faucet turning off. Every familiar noise now felt like a countdown. When Evelyn came down to the kitchen, I'd already put on the face of a husband recovering from surgery, tired, restless, but fine. She set a cup of tea in front of me, asked if I wanted breakfast. I thanked her softly, said the medicine made it hard to sleep. She nodded, her eyes scanning me like checking for cracks in a wall. Claire texted, asking if I'd be home for dinner. I said yes, told her not to worry. After sending it, a sharp ache hit me. I was telling her, don't worry, while living under the same roof with someone planning my ending. That night, Mark asked to meet in a different parking lot. Never the same place twice. A habit of men who'd spent years in danger. I arrived early, sat in my car with both hands on the steering wheel, watching traffic like it belonged to another world. Mark got in, carrying a thick folder and an iPad. He didn't waste time on greetings. He opened the files. "Your medical records," he said. "Post-surgery." I swallowed. "What about them?" "There's something wrong," he said, "and it's written very carefully." He handed me a copy of the report. Printed words, sterile medical terms, lines like "noted complication," "excessive bleeding," "additional intervention recommended," "high risk of infection," "requires close observation." My forehead burned as I read. "But I recovered fine," I said. "None of that happened." "Exactly," Mark replied. "You didn't have complications. But on paper, you did." He turned the page, pointing to the timestamps and signatures. "These entries were edited after you left recovery. There's a trace in the system. I had someone pull the log. It's dirty." I stared at the page like a headstone waiting for my name. What they were building wasn't just fear. It was cause, a future explanation. If I died from a complication, this file would say it started here. "Why?" I asked, though my voice didn't sound like mine. Mark didn't blink. "Because it makes a death look legal." The phrase hit me in the gut. Legal. Clean. No suspicion, no questions. A 56-year-old man, recent procedure, documented risk factors, stressful career. All it would take was one reasonable accident. Mark turned the iPad toward me. A screenshot of an email, short subject line. Just a few words, but each one a blade. "As long as the accident looks reasonable, everything ends clean." My vision darkened. I don't remember how long I held my breath, only the icy rush down my spine. "Where did this come from?" I asked, my calm gone. Mark spoke slowly. "From Evelyn's secondary email, a hidden account. I found it after tracing abnormal logins. She sent it to someone under an alias. I can't confirm yet, but all signs point to Collins." I clenched my fists. My mind flashed to our kitchen. Evelyn slicing cake for Claire, smiling softly, asking if I wanted more coffee. I thought of all the times she'd said, "I just worry about you." The way she straightened my collar this morning, and underneath it all, that sentence, "a reasonable accident." Part of me wanted to drive home, smash everything, scream at her. But the part that survived the longest knew better. If I exploded, I'd be laying my own neck on the block. Mark watched me, gauging my limit. "You need to hear the rest," he said. He handed me another set of papers. Life insurance. The number stood bold, $4 million. Primary beneficiary, Evelyn. I remembered signing it. Evelyn had said it was responsibility, protection for Claire, a mark of maturity. I'd agreed, because it sounded right, because everyone did it, because at our level, paperwork like that was routine. "She's the main beneficiary," Mark said. "Claire's listed, but management rights go to Evelyn for a time." I looked at him. "Meaning, if I die?" "She gets the payout," Mark said. "And with this doctored medical file, your death can be medically explained." I leaned back in the seat. Outside, the world went on. Streetlights glowing amber, cars passing, life indifferent. I felt like I was balancing on a wire over a pit, and the person holding the rope was the woman who'd slept beside me for 27 years. I spoke quietly, almost to myself. So she wants me gone. Mark didn't say yes. He didn't need to. The silence was enough. I closed my eyes for a moment. Claire's face appeared, studying law, believing in justice, believing truth could be proven. If I died in a reasonable accident, what would she have left? A mother crying on cue, a fortune, a buried truth. When I opened my eyes again, something inside me had changed. It wasn't panic anymore. It was a cold, deliberate clarity. "I'm not backing down," I said. Mark nodded once. "I know." "I'm going to set a trap," I continued, slowly, as if carving the words into stone. "If they want a reasonable accident, I'll give them an opportunity, but this one will be in the light." Mark looked at me for a moment, then spoke, his voice dropping low like someone laying out a battlefield plan. "The trap has to make them talk on their own, expose themselves. No guessing. It has to be proof." I nodded. I'd spent my life in the world of contracts, where one signature could change a man's fate. I understood the power of evidence. I also knew something else. People only slip when they feel safe. I slipped the copies back into the envelope. I held it like a fragment of truth dragged up from the mud. On the drive home, I kept the speed steady, stopped at every red light, like a man who had no idea he was being hunted. When I walked in, Evelyn was watching TV. She looked up, smiled, and asked why I'd been out so long. I told her I'd gone for a walk, doctor's advice. She nodded, her voice soft, patting the seat beside her. I sat down, let my shoulders relax, kept my breathing even, my smile just right. In my head, I began building the trap the way I'd build a structure. Strong foundation, aligned columns, and once they stepped inside, no way out without leaving footprints. I started doing the hardest thing for a man used to control and discipline. I practiced looking weak. Not the kind of weakness that comes with tears or pleading. The believable kind, the kind that makes sense to others. I took my medicine in front of Evelyn. I sighed more often. I shortened my steps on the stairs. I left my jacket hanging loosely on my shoulders, like someone tired. And most importantly, I let her see it. Evelyn watched me the way someone watches a countdown clock. She asked if I was in pain, if I felt dizzy, if I wanted to call the doctor. Her tone was gentle, her eyes concerned. But I had learned to tell the difference. Concern born of love and concern born of impatience. Love wants to protect. Impatience wants to move things along. Mark told me to keep it slow. "You just need to look like you're declining naturally," he said. "No one believes in a sudden fall if they saw you jogging yesterday." I followed that exactly. I still went to work but left early. I still visited the construction sites but stayed at a distance. I told my team the doctor advised less stress and less sun exposure. Everything sounded logical. And I could see Evelyn starting to act differently, more assertive, more calculating. She reminded me to rest like it was a task. She asked about my work schedule, where I was going, who I'd meet. She offered to drive me to a follow-up appointment but picked the exact hospital where Collins worked. I refused with a simple excuse. I preferred another clinic, independent, fewer mix-ups. Evelyn smiled and said I was too cautious, but that smile didn't reach her eyes. While I played the part of the fading husband, Mark played his, quiet, deliberate, like a shadow with a mission. He didn't say much over the phone. He just told me to meet somewhere public and noisy, a place where we could speak without drawing attention. When I arrived, Mark sat in the corner sliding a small earpiece and a phone screen toward me. "Collins has an apartment," Mark said quietly. "Not under his name directly, but the agents confirmed it, and they have eyes on it." I looked at him. "How did you—" Mark didn't elaborate. "No traces. And you don't need the details. What matters is, they talk there. I swallowed hard. A secret apartment. A place to plan without family walls listening. I thought of Evelyn's urgent meetings and catch-ups with friends. I thought of the hours she disappeared while I convinced myself not to question. The recorder's in place, Mark continued. The agents handled it legally. We just need them to say it in their own words. When they feel safe, they'll talk. I nodded, my gut tightening with both dread and clarity. Fear from realizing the scope of their plan and light from seeing for the first time a way out that didn't rely on luck. Evelyn began pushing for the right moment in subtle ways, not saying, "when you die," but weaving around it. "Do you feel more tired lately?" she asked one evening while I sat under a blanket, pretending to watch the news. "A little," I said. "Maybe you should take a few weeks off," she suggested. "Work will survive. Health comes first." I looked at her and nodded, giving her exactly what she wanted. I left the answer hanging like permission in the air. I saw her eyes brighten for a flash before she softened again, remembering to stay in character. 3 days later, I made the move Mark called the test bait. I visited the construction site outside Charlotte at noon, the busiest time of day. I walked with the project manager, stood beneath a crane, reviewed blueprints, asked a few questions like any hands-on owner. Then, in front of everyone, I swayed slightly, hand on my chest, stepping back like I'd lost balance. "You okay, Mr. Hayward?" someone asked. I forced my voice to break. "Just need to sit." Then I let myself drop onto the grass. Not hard, not dangerously, just enough to create alarm. People rushed over, calling for water, calling supervisors. Someone dialed for an ambulance. And then exactly what I needed happened. The project manager called Evelyn, her name listed as my emergency contact. I heard the phone ring, and minutes later, Evelyn arrived. Too fast, too close, as if she'd already been nearby. She knelt beside me, gripped my hand, called my name in a perfectly trembling voice. "William, can you hear me?" I cracked my eyes open, just enough to watch. Her hand was shaking, but not like fear of losing me. It was the tremor of anticipation. Through the noise and panic, I saw her pull out her phone. I thought she'd call the ambulance again, or Claire, but no. She dialed another number, quick, practiced, familiar. She turned slightly, shielding the screen, but I caught fragments in the air. "Andrew, listen, now, at the site, he just..." I lay there, half-conscious, and in that instant, everything inside me froze. Evelyn called Collins before the ambulance arrived, not for medical advice, but to report in, like an actor signaling her director that the scene had begun. When she turned back, she told me to sip water, breathe deeply, not to talk. Every move was perfectly scripted, loving wife, composed caretaker, but I could see the strings now, even if she tried to hide them. The ambulance came. Paramedics checked my vitals, asked about medical history. Evelyn answered too quickly, even details she couldn't know unless she'd read my files. I spoke slowly, feigning daze but careful enough to defend myself. I said I was fine, probably fatigue or medication. Through it all, Mark never appeared. He wasn't supposed to. His role was to stay in the dark, recording everything. That night, after I got home and lay in bed like someone recovering from a mild scare, my phone buzzed. A text from Mark. Just one sentence. "It's recorded." I didn't reply. I placed the phone face down. Evelyn sat at the edge of the bed, smoothing the blanket like she was comforting a child. She asked if I hurt. I said no. She said she'd call Collins's office tomorrow, just to double-check. I nodded. Inside me, the evidence was stacking, each piece locking into place. The call at the site, the strange priorities, the way she reacted, not like a wife acting on instinct, but like someone following a script. 2 days later, Mark met me again, in a grocery store parking lot open 24 hours. He handed me his phone and an earpiece. "Listen," he said. I heard Evelyn's voice, and Collins's, from that apartment, talking about timing, about files, about making it look natural. My hand went cold. "We've alerted the right people," Mark said. "This isn't just domestic anymore. There's medical fraud, insurance fraud, tampering with records. They won't overlook it." I looked at him. "Federal agents?" Mark nodded, saying little. "They're watching, but they need the final piece." I sat still, listening to trucks rumble on the highway. In the dark, I felt like I was standing before a door. One push, and everything would spill into the light. Mark leaned closer, voice low and firm, sealing the plan. "Once they speak the truth themselves," he said, "we win." That night, I came home earlier than usual, just as Evelyn expected from a man too tired. I ate a few spoonfuls of soup she reheated, listened to her talk about her busy day, then yawned like a man fighting sleep. "Go rest upstairs," she said, sweet as ever. "I'll clean up and join you." I nodded, climbed the stairs slowly, gripping the rail for effect. Before closing the bedroom door, I glanced down. Evelyn stood in the kitchen, phone in hand, the screen lighting her face before going dark. She didn't look up, as if I'd already ceased to exist. I locked the door, sat on the bed, exhaled quietly. Part of me wanted to scream from disgust, fear, the feeling of being reduced to a number on someone's plan. But I was past the age of letting emotion ruin reason. I lay down, pulled the blanket up, and began playing the role of a man sound asleep. Around 11 p.m., I heard the front door close, soft, unhurried, just like all the other times Evelyn went out for a bit. I waited a few minutes, then got up, opened my door slowly, stepped into the dark hallway. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. Mark had told me Collins would be at the apartment tonight, and the recorder was on. My job was simple. Stay still, stay invisible. Don't break the trap. I went back to bed, set my phone to silent, stared at the ceiling. Time dripped like water through fingers. Every minute I imagined what was happening elsewhere. Evelyn entering that apartment, taking off her shoes, pouring wine, sitting like someone about to complete a task. Collins speaking in his measured doctor's tone. I imagined them saying my name like it was an object. Around 11:40, my phone buzzed softly. A message from Mark. "They're talking." My pulse spiked, but my face stayed blank. I replied with one word. "Okay." 10 minutes later, Mark called. I answered immediately but said nothing. On the other end, Mark didn't speak either. He played the live audio from inside Collins's apartment. The sound was clear. I could even hear glasses on a table. Evelyn's voice came first, a little hoarse, like she'd been drinking. "I can't take it anymore," she said. "He just keeps living. Keeps going like nothing can touch him." Collins laughed quietly. "He keeps going because he trusts. He trusts his wife. He trusts the system. People like that are easy to control." I closed my eyes, but my ears opened wider. Every word cut deep. Evelyn asked urgently, "When?" Collins answered slowly, like reading from a prepared script. "Within 2 months. An accident at the construction site makes the most sense. He already has recorded complications. Overworked, sleep-deprived, a slip, a fall, faulty equipment. Everything can be explained." "And the records?" Evelyn asked. "They're ready," Collins said. "He signed the waiver. He has the post-op notes. If anything happens, they'll look at the complications. Not at you." Evelyn was quiet for a beat, then whispered, almost to herself, 4 million. And the assets. And the company." "Don't sound like you're begging," Collins said coldly. "It's what you're entitled to take back." I heard Evelyn exhale. Then her voice softened, like someone who had just stepped past the final line of conscience. "He's been good to me," she said, not to defend me, but as if testing whether she could still feel anything at all. Collins cut her off, giving her no chance to waver. Then he said the sentence that made my blood freeze. "Men like William are born to be used." A short line, clean, no explanation needed. I opened my eyes in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and saw all 27 years of my life stamped into something vile, a resource. On the other end, Mark said nothing. He let me listen, as if letting me witness the truth myself. Evelyn spoke again, smoother now. What if he just suddenly gets sick?" Collins replied, "No need. An accident is faster, cleaner. You just need to set the stage. Don't leave him alone when it happens. A grieving wife is the best cover." Something inside my chest wanted to explode, but I clenched my jaw, stayed silent. Mark's voice came, barely above a whisper, as if afraid his own sound might disturb the unfolding of truth. "That's enough," he said. "I've got everything." Before I could ask anything, Mark added, "They're moving." I stood up. I didn't turn on the light. I just put on my coat, slipped into my shoes, and walked out of the house like a shadow. I drove to the agreed spot, a parking lot near the building where Collins's apartment was. On the way, my head felt strangely empty. No more questions, just a cold, sharp clarity. I wasn't the one waiting to die. I was the one watching the truth hang itself. Mark was already there, inside a dark car. When I opened his door, I saw 2 other men in plain clothes, expressionless, wearing earpieces. One gave me a short nod, no introductions. I knew who they were from the way they moved, the way they wasted no words. On the screen in front of us, the camera feed from the apartment was clear. Evelyn sat on the sofa, legs crossed, a glass of wine in her hand. Collins paced near the window, speaking like a man giving a lecture. The scene was so ordinary it was terrifying. No yelling, no weapons, no drama. Just 2 people calmly discussing my death as if scheduling an appointment. One of the men murmured, "We're going in." Everything happened fast and precise, like a door opening with the right key. I didn't go first. I followed behind, hearing the echo of footsteps in the hallway, the ding of the elevator, my heart beat steady but my hands firm. When the apartment door swung open, Collins froze. Evelyn's head snapped around, her wine glass tilting. The agents stepped in first, clearly announcing they had a warrant and ordering them to stay still. Collins tried to smile, to look surprised. Evelyn jumped to her feet, her eyes darting wildly for an escape. Then she saw me standing behind them, not in a hospital bed, not weak, not dying. I stood straight, calm, my eyes hard as stone. In that instant, Evelyn's face changed so fast it was almost unreal. Shock, realization, then fury like fire. "You!" she screamed, voice cracking. "You betrayed me!" She shouted as if I had ruined the family, as if I were the liar. She lunged toward me, but they held her back. Collins started to speak, trying to twist the story, but his words were cut off by the sound of handcuffs snapping shut. Evelyn kept screaming, calling me names that might have swayed strangers, but not me. She cried, but those tears no longer reached me. I looked at her and stayed silent. I didn't need to win with words. Everything was already in the recordings, in their own voices, their own faces. As they were led out, Evelyn turned back one last time, searching my eyes for some trace of the man she used to know. But all she found was someone awake. The game was over, and I was no longer the prey. I left the building late that night. There was no triumph in me, only a hollow quiet, as if I'd just stepped out of a room where I'd lived too long without knowing it. The Charlotte air felt colder than I expected. I got into the car, shut the door, and exhaled slowly. Mark sat in the passenger seat, watching me for a moment before saying, "The hardest part isn't over." I understood. Evelyn in handcuffs wasn't the ending. The real ending waited in my house, in my daughter's room, in the trust Claire and I had built for 22 years. I drove home alone. The living room light was off. The kitchen still held Evelyn's neatly folded dish towel as if nothing had happened. The faint smell of dish soap made me nauseous. I went upstairs, past Claire's room. The door was closed. She wasn't home. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the empty space where Evelyn used to lie. I told myself Claire would call. She would ask what happened. I would explain. I would show her the evidence. She would understand. But my phone didn't ring that way. It vibrated once. A call. "Oh!" And when I saw my daughter's name on the screen, I already knew her voice wouldn't sound the same. "Dad?" Claire said, breath quick. "Mom just called me." I closed my eyes. "Where are you?" "I'm not coming home," she said, her voice cooling like something sinking underwater. "Mom said, she said you trapped her, that you're sending her to prison so you can be free." Each word hit like cracking glass. "Claire, listen to me. I have proof, recordings, documents." "You always have proof," she snapped. "You always think you're smarter than everyone. You always think you can control everything." I wasn't angry. I just felt pain, because that wasn't my daughter speaking. It was Evelyn's voice reshaped through fear. "Come home," I said softly. "You don't have to believe me yet. I just need you safe." "Mom said you're dangerous," Claire burst out. "She said you've changed. She said you're cold. You're not Dad anymore." I swallowed hard. "Did you see her cry?" Claire paused. "Yes." "Did she say she was sorry for lying to me?" I asked gently. "Don't bring that up," Claire said, her voice shaking. "I don't want to hear it." I could have pulled her back with memories. Nights by her bedside when she was sick, drives to her internships, hours waiting outside her exams. But if I did, I'd become exactly what Evelyn claimed, a man who used love as manipulation. So I said only one thing. "I love you, and I won't force you." On the line, I heard Claire inhale, like she wanted to speak but couldn't. Then the call ended. I sat still. The house was silent. The clock ticked like a reminder that time keeps moving no matter what we lose. The next morning, Mark called. He said Evelyn had already contacted her lawyer. "She's going to say you're jealous, controlling, that you staged everything," he said, "and she'll cling to Claire. That's her last lifeline." I asked the question that scraped my throat raw. Does Claire believe me? Mark was quiet for a few seconds. "Not yet, but she's smart. She'll start asking questions." I tried to live normally, went to the office, signed papers, sat through meetings. But every time the elevator doors opened, I hoped it was Claire. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was her. And every time, it wasn't. 3 days later, Mark texted. Claire agreed to listen to part of it. I didn't rush to see her. I didn't fight to win her back like a business deal. I let Mark be the bridge, because he could bring the truth without the desperation of a father afraid of losing his child. That evening, I parked outside a coffee shop near the law school, far enough not to make her feel watched. Mark went in with Claire. I watched through the window. She sat upright, gripping a paper cup like holding herself together. 20 minutes later, Mark came out, his face heavy. He got into my car and sat for a while before speaking. "She listened to the recording," he said slowly. "I didn't ask which one. I already knew there would be a single sentence that shattered her world." Mark continued, "Evelyn called Claire a hindrance, and Collins, he said the child was just a variable, something to be handled neatly." My eyes burned, but no tears fell. I imagined Claire hearing those words. She'd spent her life believing her mother was her safe place, and now her mother had called her an obstacle. "How did she react?" I asked. Mark sighed. "She didn't cry at first. She just sat still. Then she asked me one question. 'Mr. Mark, were those years even real?' I lowered my head to the steering wheel. 'I have to talk to her.' 'You will,' Mark said, 'but not by arguing, by waiting.' Oh, that night I sat at my desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out paper. No emails, no messages. A handwritten letter, slow, deliberate, each word like stepping on thin ice. I told her the story from the day I met Evelyn at a fundraiser, but I didn't romanticize it. I wrote about the silences I ignored for the sake of peace. I told her about the envelope in the surgery room, the phrase, "Don't let him see," about how my stillness wasn't weakness but survival. I made one thing clear. I wasn't asking her to hate her mother. I only wanted her to understand the truth so she could protect herself. I wrote about the one certainty in my life. I have loved you since the moment you took your first breath. That love has nothing to do with anyone else. It's real. I wrote until my hand cramped. When the ink dried, I folded the pages, sealed them in an envelope, and addressed it to Claire's friend's apartment where she was staying. I didn't sign with formality. I just wrote, "Dad." Before sealing it, I sat still for a long time. I realized something true. Claire might never forgive me. She might side with her mother, because believing that the world she trusted was rotten could be unbearable. I sent the letter anyway, because I would rather lose my daughter for a while than keep her by force and make her hate me forever. I accepted that as the price of survival. In the days that followed, I waited in silence. No calls, no messages. Each night I set my phone on the table and sat on the porch, watching the dim streetlights, listening to the wind through the trees. Every night I reminded myself of one thing: as long as she's safe. Then, one late afternoon, my phone buzzed. A message from Claire, just 8 words. "Are you home, Dad? I want to see you." I read it over and over until the screen went dark. "Are you home, Dad? I want to see you." 8 words, and my hands trembled like a man waking from a long fever. I replied right away, "I'm home. The door's open. Come in." Then I stood, pacing the living room, not knowing where to put my hands. I straightened the cushions even though they were fine. I looked out the window. The sky was slate gray. Early winter rain fell thin as silk, settling quietly on the lawn. 15 minutes later, headlights cut through the glass. I heard the soft grind of tires on wet pavement. My heart pounded so hard I pressed a hand to my chest to steady it. The front door opened. Claire stood there, drenched. She hadn't brought an umbrella. Her dark coat clung to her shoulders, hair wet, eyes red and swollen, like she'd cried for hours. In her hand was a small fabric bag, like someone who didn't plan to stay long, someone still unsure this house was safe. I didn't run to her. I was afraid to startle her, afraid she'd turn away. I just stood still, voice low. "Come in." Claire stepped inside and closed the door. For a moment she looked around the living room as if it were both familiar and foreign. Then she looked at me. Her eyes flickered as if trying to reconnect a cut thread. "Dad," she said, her voice cracking before she paused. She swallowed hard, words caught in her throat. I stayed silent, letting her speak at her own pace. Claire took a shaky breath. "I went to see Mom." I felt the cold spread through me. "Where?" "The detention center," she said. I needed to hear it from her, not from Mark, not from files, not from recordings." She looked down at her wet shoes, then back up. I wanted to look her in the eye and ask, "Why?" My throat tightened. "What did she say?" Claire gave a dry laugh, one without joy. "At first, she still acted like the victim, said she was forced, said you trapped her. that you were jealous, controlling, abusive. Her hands clenched around the bag straps. I almost believed her, until I repeated one exact line from the recording. I didn't ask which one. I knew it would be the final cut. Claire continued, her voice small but steady. I asked her, "Did you call me a hindrance?" I closed my eyes for a second. When I opened them, I saw Claire fighting back tears. She went silent, Claire said. Silent for so long. And I realized she didn't react like someone wrongly accused. She reacted like someone unmasked. She gasped softly. I asked if she'd known Dr. Collins before. I asked about the name Harper. I asked about the envelope. Claire shook her head. Do you know what she said, Dad? She looked at me like I was a stranger and said, "You don't understand. Adults have things you don't need to know." I felt my insides twist. And then what? Claire looked straight at me, rain dripping from her hair down her cheeks like tears. I said, "I have a right to know because he's my father, and because it's me." She took a deep breath, then said the words that seemed to drain all the air from the room. She confessed. I stood frozen, the floor feeling slightly unsteady beneath me. Claire spoke slowly, as if afraid that saying it too fast would break her. She said she met Collins before she met you. She said she came back because of money, because of resentment, because of the years she thought were stolen from her. She let out a pained laugh. She said, "You were the kind of man who trusted too easily, who was easy to choose." Those were her exact words, Dad. I heard the rain tapping against the window, steady as a second hand. I asked her if she ever loved me, Claire whispered. She didn't answer right away. She just said she raised me well. She said she fulfilled her role. Claire's voice cracked, her lips trembling. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up and said, "I am not one of your roles." My eyes stung. I thought I had no tears left, but they'd only been buried deep. Claire took a step forward, then another. She stood right in front of me, close enough that I could see the rain still clinging to her lashes. "I'm sorry," she burst out, like something breaking loose. "I'm sorry for not believing you." And then she hugged me. Not the polite hug of an adult, but the desperate embrace of a child finding their way home after being lost. Her whole body trembled, her shoulders shaking, sobs muffled but raw. I wrapped my arms around her tightly. Her back was cold from the rain. I pressed my chin to her hair and said hoarsely, "It's okay. You're home now." "I said awful things," Claire cried. I thought you wanted to hurt Mom." "You were just protecting the person you trusted," I said. "There's nothing wrong with loving her. It's just, she used that love." Claire looked up, eyes red. She looked at me like I didn't matter. Her voice broke. "I don't understand." I wiped the water from her cheeks, not knowing if it was rain or tears. "You matter. You're the most important thing in my life." We sat down on the sofa. I wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and handed her a cup of hot tea. She held it with both hands, as if trying to hold on to its warmth. "Mark said the upcoming trial will be intense," Claire said, her voice steadier now but tired. I want to stand with you." I looked at her. "You don't have to. You've been through enough." Claire shook her head. "I need to do what's right, and I need to say the truth myself, not for revenge, but to end the lie." She took a breath. "I don't want her to tell the story her way." I nodded. I saw in her a new kind of strength, not coldness, but maturity. My daughter had walked through a door no one wants to cross, and she was still standing. The following weeks passed in a blur of tension but clarity. I worked with prosecutors, submitted documents, signed statements. Mark brought more evidence, cash transactions, altered medical records. Claire met with them too, giving her account of the confrontation in the detention center, the words Evelyn had spoken when she had nowhere left to run. On the day of the trial, the sunlight was pale. I wore a gray suit, tied my tie out of old habit, like a man who had walked into countless boardrooms. But this time, I wasn't there to negotiate. I was there to end it. Claire walked beside me, her hand brushing mine, a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone. In the courtroom, Evelyn sat across from us, her face lightly made up but her eyes hollow. Collins stared straight ahead, trying to maintain the composure of a man used to standing above others. When the recordings played, their voices echoed coldly through the solemn room. I saw members of the jury frown, then freeze, then glance at Evelyn as if seeing a stranger. When the part about the hindrance played, Claire gripped my hand. I didn't look at her. I just let her feel that I was there. The verdict came after several days. The sentence was heavy. The conclusion was clear. There was no room left for twisted stories. People asked if I felt victorious. I didn't. I just felt lighter, like someone who had finally put down a stone that had been crushing his chest for months. I walked out of the courthouse into the sunlight. Claire stood beside me, exhaled deeply, then looked at me. "Let's go home, Dad," she said. I nodded. And this time, as we walked down those courthouse steps, I felt like we were heading toward the rest of our lives. Not to forget, but to live on, together. After the trial, life didn't return to normal. It became quieter, clearer, more honest. Claire and I didn't talk much about what happened, not to avoid it, but because we both knew some things didn't need to be repeated to be real. We started over with small things. Breakfasts together in the old kitchen, evenings on the porch, listening to the wind move through the trees. Claire told me about law school, the cases she was studying, how she now saw the world through less naive but steadier eyes. I gradually handed her parts of the business, not through a sudden decision, but intentionally, step by step. I let her sit in meetings, read contracts, ask questions. I didn't teach her how to make money. I taught her how to read people, how to spot the silences between words, the details that didn't fit. Claire learned faster than I expected, maybe because she had paid too high a price to understand that everything glittering should still be held up to the light. One afternoon, as we stood in the office looking out over the parking lot, Claire asked quietly, "Do you regret trusting Mom?" I thought for a long moment, then shook my head. No, trusting isn't the mistake. The mistake is closing your eyes to the signs. I learned that late, but soon enough to still be here with you. Claire nodded. I saw in her eyes no accusation, only the calm understanding of someone who had survived collapse. I realized then that my true legacy wasn't in accounts, or the company, or real estate. It was the ability to recognize truth, the right to pause, verify, and protect yourself before it's too late. To understand that love doesn't mean blindness, and kindness isn't a license for others to take advantage. The story you've just heard is fictional, inspired by real human experiences and circumstances. It's told not to promote or justify any harmful action, and not directed at any specific person or organization. What's worth holding on to isn't fear, but the lesson. Trust is essential for living, but verification is our responsibility, to ourselves and those we love. If you ever find yourself in a similar situation, stay calm. Don't react in panic. Gather evidence, seek legal support, and give yourself time to see clearly before making any decision. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. Your presence means more than you realize. If this story touched you in any way, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Every story here is told with the hope of offering perspective, emotion, or a small lesson to someone out there. If you think this video might help someone recognize the truth sooner than I did, please share it. Thank you for every view, every comment, every moment you spend here. It's what allows stories with meaning to keep reaching others.